Welcome to Dark Whispers, where the darkest secrets come to life. Today, we'll delve into a world where revenge intertwines with black magic, unleashing powers beyond human comprehension. Brace yourselves for chilling narratives. Subscribe to Dark Whispers for more. Now enjoy. Greetings everyone from the channel. My name is David, and what I want to tell you doesn't leave me happy at all because this event brought out the worst side of a human being and was driven by damn ambition. It all happened 50 years ago, and because of that, I lost my father, who was all I had left. My mother departed from this world in a traffic accident when I was only 17 years old. We lived a simple life on a small farm of only 3 hectares of land, but it was enough to grow our food and raise some animals, like chickens, pigs, and a few dairy cows. There, I could also raise and train my 4-legged friend, the black horse named Lightning. I didn't mind spending many hours a week with him, but I brushed and bathed him daily without fail. Of course, I took care of and loved all the animals, but he was my favorite. I took care of working in the fields and tending to the crops to get a bountiful harvest. Sometimes my wife helped me, but not always, as she took care of the house and prepared meals. In addition to having a small business of my own producing cheeses that we sold in town, my father lived with us. He was an older man but cheerful and affectionate. Due to his age, he couldn't work, so he spent his days resting and, as he could, taking care of my children. That's how our simple but very happy life was. Everything was going well. We lived peacefully, as I'm telling you, until one day disaster struck our doorstep. One morning, my wife and children had gone to town, and I stayed on the farm doing the chores. The hours flowed calmly, and as the afternoon sun reached its peak, I returned to my dwelling to seek the refreshing glass of juice my spouse habitually prepared and stored in the icebox. Upon entering, my progenitor was nowhere to be found. I called his name several times, but my calls were met with silence. I pondered if he was perhaps taking a stroll or indulging in a nap in the backyard hammock, as he was known to do. After quenching my thirst, I continued my journey towards the kitchen, but as I passed the lavatory, I noticed the illuminated light. I surmised my father might be within since he was absent outdoors. I opted not to disturb him, assuming he was tending to personal matters. Yet, upon reaching the kitchen, an unsettling sensation washed over me, a hollowness in my gut, a jolt that defied explanation. Driven by this disquiet, I resolved to check on my father in the lavatory. With a gentle rap on the door and several calls, I received no response. Desperation surged within me, and instinctively, I lowered myself to peer beneath the door. There, I saw my poor father sprawled on the floor as if slumbering. Panic seized me, and with all my might, I forced the door open. Scooping my father into my arms, I laid him upon the bed. It was clear he required immediate medical attention, but our lack of a vehicle presented a challenge. I needed assistance. With urgency, I called out to our neighbor from the adjacent farm, who, fortunately, was available and promptly arrived. Together, we carefully lifted my father and set off towards the town. From that day forward, marked by that ill-fated incident, our lives were forever altered, for my father would never be the same again.
Thank you very much for listening. Greetings, friends of the channel. My name is Melanie. Today, I want to share my story with you. When I first arrived in New York City, it was staggering to see the magnitude of the city. I came from a small town in rural Arizona. My cousin Adrian was the one who suggested that I move to the capital city to pursue better job opportunities. In the place where I lived, there weren't many opportunities at that time. My mother was suffering from a cancerous tumor and required expensive treatments. We needed to bring in money to cover her expenses. The cost of medical care was quite high. I only had a high school education, so I didn't have many opportunities to earn money in the town where I lived. My cousin worked in the house of very wealthy people in New York City. She performed various tasks such as cooking, taking care of the children, doing laundry, and cleaning the house. She lived in that house and didn't have to worry about food expenses, rent, and other services. All expenses were paid by the employers, so all the money she earned was hers to keep. Additionally, they paid very well. One day, a family known to her employers asked my cousin if she knew anyone who wanted to work in their house because they needed someone trustworthy and highly recommended. My cousin thought of me since she knew about the situation I was going through. The salary was good and the work was really easy to do. My cousin called me and explained the job to me. Given my need for money, I said that I was very interested in working with that family, and that's how I ended up in that concrete jungle. Upon my arrival in the city, my cousin fetched me from the bus station, and together we hailed a taxi to reach our family's residence. Upon our arrival at the stunning abode, a gracious lady emerged to greet us warmly and proceeded to conduct a brief interview. She inquired about my origins, skills, and whether I intended to reside with them. From that day forth, I affirmed my intent to stay and contribute through work. Subsequently, she gave me a tour of the entire house and outlined the various tasks ahead. Though a tad apprehensive, being without my mother for the first time, I appreciated her hospitality. She then designated a room for my stay, where I commenced unpacking and organizing my belongings. Placing a crucifix on the nightstand, I offered prayers to Jesus, seeking strength for my endeavors. My thoughts lingered on my mother, beseeching divine assistance to afford her medical treatment and rid her of the cancerous tumor. As my inaugural workday dawned, I descended early to prepare breakfast, where I encountered Mr. Jensen, the household's proprietor. Seizing the opportunity, I introduced myself, receiving a warm welcome from him. Following breakfast, he commended my culinary skills, expressing confidence in future meals under my care. However, I detected an unsettling undertone in his demeanor. While his words were complimentary, his gaze held an unfamiliar intensity, traversing my form with an almost provocative air. Though I was young and attractive, I found his scrutiny unwarranted, particularly given my modest attire, albeit snug, owing to the uniform provided. Over the ensuing 2 months of labor, I gradually acclimated to the household's rhythm, diligently setting aside funds for my future. Given that I had no personal expenses, I found great satisfaction in my situation, especially since I could contribute to my family's needs, particularly my mother's medical treatments. Working in that environment was quite comfortable for me, and the entire family treated me with kindness. However, little did I anticipate that this pleasant atmosphere would abruptly change. Gradually, I began to notice Mr. Jensen's peculiar glances in my direction, which left me feeling uneasy and somewhat intimidated. Whenever I prepared meals, he would promptly seat himself at the table, his silent presence palpable. Despite his attempts to avert his gaze when I turned, I sensed his penetrating stare lingering on me. Furthermore, during the weekly wage disbursements, he insisted on personally handing me the cash, maintaining physical contact for longer than necessary. His words, coupled with his lingering touch, insinuated a deeper intention, leaving me unsettled. While tending to the garden, I frequently felt his watchful eyes from behind the curtain of his room, a discomforting sensation that persisted from the beginning of my task until its completion. Each time I turned to address his scrutiny, he would hastily withdraw, albeit not before his surreptitious observation became evident. This behavior was the sole aspect of my experience in that household that I found displeasing, although I must admit he had never overstepped boundaries or displayed any disrespect towards me. However, everything changed one Sunday afternoon when I had some free time and ventured out for a stroll with my cousin. Upon our return, I noticed the absence of Mrs. Jensen's pickup truck, indicating that the family was likely out, as was customary on Sundays, often visiting relatives. Assuming the house was empty, I decided to relax in my room and perhaps watch a movie. As I entered, I was met with an unusual quietness, a stark departure from the usual bustling activity. Surprisingly, my room's door was ajar, inviting further investigation. What struck me as odd was his usual insistence on keeping it shut. Upon stepping inside, I was taken aback to find Mr. Jensen standing by my bed, his clothes soiled, hands covering his face as he took deep breaths. To my dismay, I realized he was clutching a pair of soiled panties. As he became aware of my presence, he hastily concealed the object behind his back, attempting to feign nonchalance as he greeted me with a casual "good afternoon." He inquired about the whereabouts of the TV remote, suggesting he had entered my room in search of it before swiftly exiting, claiming he would continue his search elsewhere in the house. As I shut the door behind him, I was left reeling from the discomfort of the encounter. Barely moments had passed before Mr. Jensen returned, knocking urgently at my door. Opening it hesitantly, I was caught off guard as he lunged at me, forcefully attempting to push me out. Overwhelmed, I found myself thrown onto the bed, his weight pressing down on me as he apologized for his actions, attributing his desires to the scent of my intimate garments. Despite my protests, he persisted, his advances becoming increasingly forceful as he attempted to kiss my neck and grope me. Aware of the danger, I screamed for help, praying that someone would come to my aid. Thankfully, the sound of his wife's arrival interrupted the ordeal, providing a temporary reprieve. Startled and apprehensive, Mr. Jensen issued an ultimatum: submit to him or leave his house immediately. With tears streaming down my face, I chose the latter, eager to escape the harrowing situation. In a desperate bid to assert control, he reached for something in his pocket. He took out $5,000 and gave it to me, telling me to pack my things and leave. In an instant, his wife was already at the door of my room, very surprised, asking what was happening. Mr. Jensen very astutely replied, "It's nothing, my love. Unfortunately, Melanie has to go back to her state. Her mother is in critical condition. She has to leave now. She is very sad and upset about leaving us. Isn't that right, Melanie?" She asked me if that was true, and I replied yes with tears in my eyes. She approached me and gave me a tight hug, mentioning that the whole family would miss me, but that I had the doors of their house open for whenever I wanted to come back. She understood very well what I was going through. I started gathering all my things from that room, put them in my suitcases, and took a taxi to the bus station. Once at the bus station, I called my cousin and mentioned that I was leaving. I didn't say anything about what had happened with Mr. Jensen. I felt ashamed. Besides, she had recommended me not to do anything against that family. When I arrived in Arizona, I realized how bad my mother was. So, I dedicated myself to taking care of her full time. 2 weeks passed and my savings were running out. I needed to find a way to generate income. I was going through so much and still scared by the attempted abuse by Mr. Jensen. I was afraid to go out on the street. Moreover, I lost sleep every night. I had never experienced a situation like this before. Every day I felt very anxious. One of my mother's sisters had insisted a lot on seeking some kind of alternative help besides doctors to try to restore my mother's health. She recommended seeking the help of a natural healer. In fact, she even mentioned consulting someone specializing in witchcraft. My mother didn't believe in that, but given the conditions she was in, which were getting worse, she decided she had nothing to lose. So, she decided to accept this other alternative to regain her vitality. That's how we visited a place. We sought the expertise of a holistic practitioner who recommended herbal infusions and dietary supplements for my mother's regimen. Following this, my aunt proposed visiting a renowned old healer located a distance away from our city. Eager to restore her health, my mother agreed to the journey. Upon arrival, the healer quickly discerned my mother's condition, attributing her discomfort to the advanced stage of cancer, confirming our suspicions. Despite her expertise, she conceded that medical intervention was necessary for treatment. As she spoke, her gaze lingered on me, prompting her to offer assistance for my own unresolved trauma. With my aunt's encouragement, I consented to a cleansing ritual. The healer conducted the ritual, utilizing eggs and rue infused with a potent liquid to purify my spirit. Upon completion, she assured us of her availability and handed me her contact information, cryptically mentioning the prospect of revenge. Though perplexed by her words, we departed and returned home, proceeding with our evening routine before retiring for the night. As I lay in bed, a sense of physical relief washed over. Gone was the constant anxiety, replaced by a simmering rage and thirst for vengeance against Mr. Jensen. Despite the absence of fear, my mother's condition worsened, necessitating costly surgery beyond our means. Frustration and resentment toward Mr. Jensen fueled my determination for retribution. Holding the healer Estefania's contact information, I reached out, expressing my readiness for revenge. She acknowledged my prompt response, aware of my desire for justice following the cleansing ritual. I confided in her my intention to bring Mr. Jensen to account for his actions. His callous dismissal of my employment and obstruction of my ability to aid my mother demanded retribution. With resolve, I contacted Mrs. Estefania, Mr. Jensen's wife, under the guise of seeking employment once more. She welcomed me back warmly, unaware of my ulterior motive. Upon my return to the household, I was greeted warmly, particularly by the children, while Mr. Jensen appeared surprised by my presence. Seizing a private moment, he cryptically remarked, "I like to think that if you come back here, it's on my terms. You'll be mine," he asserted. I acquiesced, agreeing to his terms but subtly asserting my own control. It was unfamiliar territory for me, and I needed him to respect my boundaries. He claimed to understand, eagerly anticipating the day when I would be in his embrace. As the weekend approached, I awaited the family's departure, knowing they would be away. Once they were gone, I contacted the witch for guidance on exacting my revenge. She advised utilizing an object imbued with Mr. Jensen's energy, preferably infused with bodily fluids, for a potent spell. I ventured to Mr. Jensen's office, retrieving a partially smoked cigar containing his saliva, ideal for the ritual. Packing it carefully, I made my way to Arizona to consult the witch. Upon arrival, I expressed my desire for complete dominance over him, seeking to influence his every action without detection. The witch proposed a potent binding spell tailored to my needs and commenced the ritual. Using a small cloth doll, she positioned the cigar on it, securing it with pins and placing them in various parts of the doll. Then she meticulously wrapped it with a thick red ribbon, resembling a mummy, and placed it inside a jar along with other unidentified items. She requested that I prick one of my fingers to obtain a drop of blood and let it drip into the jar, thus completing the ritual. In the jar, she poured honey, completely submerging the doll, and then sealed it. The witch explained that, with that binding spell, I would have total control over the man, but with a warning. The spell would also awaken in him a strong passion and intense desire for me. She cautioned that the spell could not be undone unless I refrained from intimate relations with him. After bidding farewell, I returned home, reflecting on my actions and the irreversible consequences of the spell. Over the following week, I began to notice a change in the way Mr. Jensen looked at me, with evident desire in his piercing gaze. When he was at home, his eyes relentlessly sought my body, making me uncomfortable. On some occasions, his excessive attention disturbed me, as he seemed increasingly obsessed with me. The following Sunday, as the family prepared to visit the grandparents, Mr. Jensen claimed to feel unwell and decided not to accompany them. As soon as everyone left, he approached the door of my room, knocked and called my name, asking if I was there. I asked him to come in. As soon as he entered, I could see his uncontrollable expression. He said he couldn't take it anymore, that he wanted me right at that moment. I knew very well that I needed to tease him a little, at least give him a taste of what he desired so much. That would be the sacrifice I would have to make to achieve my goal. So I got up from the bed, slowly approached him and began to kiss him. He kissed me passionately, embracing my waist tightly. He began to run his hands all over my spine, slowly descending to my hips, caressing gently, yet with a hint of force. After a few minutes of kissing, I coldly backed away from him. He wanted to continue, pleading with me not to leave him like that. At that moment, I started crying. My tears were of disgust and anger that I felt towards Mr. Jensen. I used those tears to say that I felt very bad, apologizing for it not being the time for passion, but that I was very distressed because my mother needed urgent surgery and we didn't have the money for it. He quickly pulled out his wallet and gave me all the money he had in it. I said that amount was not enough. He asked me how much money I needed. I said it would be $300,000. For the surgery, he asked for a minute, went to his room and came back with a checkbook in hand. I could see him filling out and signing the check for the amount I had mentioned. He gave me one last kiss, saying he would wait until I felt better, that he was there to help me in any way he could. He left my room that night. I could hear in my employer's room how Mr. Jensen indulged with his wife and all the desire with which I had left him. It seemed that they were enjoying a passionate and fiery encounter. This was good for me because he was letting off steam, and it would give me more time to carry out my plan. 2 days later, at night when Mr. Jensen was working in his office, I went to talk to him. He quickly got up from his desk, went to the door and locked it. As soon as he finished doing that, he hugged and kissed me. I told him to stop as we could be overheard. I mentioned that I had something very important to tell him. I went straight to the point and said that I had made a mistake in the economic amount of the surgery cost. I said the cost was double, so we needed an additional $300,000. He approached his desk and quickly pulled out a checkbook, filling it out and signing it for the amount of money I had mentioned was still needed. He said there was no problem, that he only hoped that being with me would be worth every penny of those checks. I said it would be, too. I asked him if he was in love with me, and he mentioned that he was madly in love and desired me with deep longing. That's how I could verify how powerful the spell was. The potent spell had taken hold of him completely. In my presence, that once imposing gentleman transformed into a submissive figure, like a child seeking approval. It was evident that my words held immense power over him. He seemed to comply with my every whim. Under the spell's influence, he became infatuated and offered me everything he had. He suggested we move away together, start a new life in our own home away from his family. It was astonishing how quickly he entertained thoughts of ending his marriage, barely 15 days after my return to work. Sensing his vulnerability, I realized I needed to deceive him further to maintain control. I assured him we would be together, but insisted on a careful, peaceful separation from his wife, prolonging his anticipation. Like a giddy child, he eagerly agreed, eagerly awaiting the day we would share a bed and a home. With a final kiss, I bid him farewell, concealing my true intentions. That evening, I packed my belongings, ready to leave the following day. My revenge was complete. I had secured enough money for my mother's surgery and to support my family. As I served breakfast the next morning, Senior Jensen gazed at me with infatuation, unaware that it would be the last time he'd see me. He left to take the children to school. I took that moment to inform the lady that I was leaving, stating it was urgent for me to be home to take care of my mother. I apologized for leaving so suddenly, but she understood, mentioning she hoped for my mother's speedy recovery, and that I could return when I had everything sorted out. I hailed a taxi and went to the bus station. There I called the witch, asking her to please break the spell. She asked if I had had intimate encounters with the old man. I said no. The witch mentioned she would break the spell, which would bring tranquility and peace of mind back to Senior Jensen. Back home I felt calmer. After a few months we made good use of the money. I operated on my mother and paid for follow-up treatment so she could fully overcome cancer. With the leftover money, I decided to go to the United States to improve my quality of life. I know what I did wasn't right. In fact, I don't feel guilty for what I did. I simply made a potential abuser pay by taking only a small part of what he had in excess. It wasn't a pleasant experience for me, but I had to do it to save my mother and have a better life with my family. It's been several years since that incident, and I haven't heard anything from that family since.
And if you're not subscribed yet, don't waste any time. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any episode of Dark Whispers. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of this episode. Your feedback is valuable and helps us improve more and more. We appreciate you joining us on this journey through the shadows. Until the next episode, here on Dark Whispers.